Artem wasn't the type to believe in mysticism or anything supernatural. He lived in a modern world where it seemed everything had a logical explanation. He worked as a photographer, and his new smartphone with an excellent camera had been a real find, allowing him to capture high-quality images even in the most unexpected places. One evening, Artem decided to take a walk through an abandoned park that lay far from the city's noise. The park had been neglected for years, nearly forgotten, with overgrown weeds winding around old rides and benches. It seemed like the perfect place for a moody photo shoot, he thought. As the sun dipped lower, Artem pulled out his phone, activated the camera, and began capturing images of the broken-down rides, decaying benches, and street lamps. The photos looked like scenes from a post-apocalyptic movie, empty, desolate, filled with sorrow. But when he snapped a picture of an old lamppost, he noticed something strange on the screen. A figure, a human silhouette, translucent and blurred, was standing a little way off. Artem couldn't see anything unusual in front of him. This figure was only visible on his phone's screen. He frowned, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "What the hell?" he muttered, moving the camera closer to the strange spot. But as soon as he aimed the camera at the figure again, it disappeared. The park looked as empty as before. Artem shrugged, deciding it must have been a trick of the light, and continued taking photos. But a slight unease had settled in, making it hard to enjoy the shoot. The next day, Artem returned to the park, this time deliberately aiming his camera at spots that had seemed strange the day before. He checked every corner, every object, hoping to catch another glimpse of the ghostly shape. And soon enough, it appeared again. Now the figure on his screen looked like a tall man in an old-fashioned hat, his face obscured by shadows. He stood motionless, staring directly at Artem through the screen, his gaze empty and cold. Artem felt goosebumps rising on his skin. Unable to control his nerves, he lowered his phone and looked around. He felt that someone, or something, was nearby, hiding at the edge of visibility, waiting to be noticed. But without the camera, he saw no one. This strange man existed only through his phone's lens. Artem decided to approach and aimed his camera at the figure again. But the closer he got, the blurrier the image became until finally the silhouette faded away completely. When he reached the spot where the figure had been standing, he felt a sudden chill in the air, despite the warm summer evening. He shivered, still trying to comprehend what was happening, but something inside him urged him to leave. Despite his fear, Artem couldn't leave the place alone. The following evening, he decided to walk along the old sideshow tent located on the edge of the park. This pavilion was adorned with elaborate carvings and peeling paint, as if it had once been the heart of a fairground or carnival. Now it stood abandoned, consumed by nature. Artem turned on his camera and started filming. As soon as the outlines of the tent appeared on the screen, he saw the shadows once again. This time, there were different figures. A small girl in an old-fashioned dress, a woman in a long, dark coat, and a man with a mustache, lurking in the shadows with burning eyes that looked like embers. The girl seemed to be staring right at him, while the woman tilted her head slightly, as if she recognized him. A chill ran down Artem's spine. These ghostly figures didn't move, but they emanated a sinister energy, as if they were watching him, wanting to get closer. He took a step toward them, holding the camera in front of him, but as he approached, the figures began to blur like mist, and in a moment, they were gone. Artem lowered his phone, feeling the heavy weight of the air around him. His heart was racing, and he was almost afraid to breathe. It felt as though unseen eyes were still watching him. After that evening, Artem tried to forget about what had happened. He realized he was becoming almost obsessed with returning to the abandoned park, where strange ghostly figures appeared on his phone's screen. He shared his experiences with a friend, but his friend only laughed and suggested it was probably a glitch in the camera. But Artem knew that wasn't true. The figures were too clear, too real. The next night, he returned to the park, hoping to capture something else and prove to himself that these weren't hallucinations. At first, everything seemed calm, with no strange shadows. But when he reached the park center, where an old fountain stood, his camera once again picked up something strange. A figure appeared on the screen, a man in a dark coat standing several meters away, staring directly into the camera. Artem couldn't see him with the naked eye, but the figure was clear on his screen, as though he were standing right there in front of him. "Who are you?" Artem whispered, not expecting an answer. But an answer came. In the silence around him, he heard a faint whisper. "I'm here because you called me." The words echoed in his head. Artem jumped back, trying to turn off the camera, but his fingers were trembling, and the screen continued showing the figure. It was moving, coming closer, and its face became visible. Pale, lifeless, chilling. Artem bolted, not daring to look back. It felt as though every step echoed behind him, as if someone was following, watching his every move. Artem didn't know how to explain what was happening. He was sure the visions on his phone screen were real, even if he couldn't see the figures himself. Desperate to understand, he began researching the park's history and came across several old newspaper articles. He discovered that many years ago, several people had disappeared in that park. Among them were a young girl, a woman in a long coat, and a man last seen near the sideshow tent. The police never found any trace of their disappearance, and the park was soon closed. Artem realized that these were the people he had seen on his phone screen. But the most terrifying discovery awaited him. In one of the articles, there was mention of a man in a dark coat who was supposedly seen following the missing people. He was last seen near the fountain, standing in the shadows. Artem understood that the figure that had approached him in the park was this very man. He didn't know why the man's spirit kept appearing, but one thing was clear. This ghost was determined to take him. He had come back to finish what he'd started years ago. On his final night, Artem returned to the park, determined to face whatever was haunting him. He felt that these restless spirits would not leave him alone until he faced them head on. The moment he stepped onto the path leading to the old fountain, he turned on his camera. The figures were everywhere. The girl stood by the edge of the path. The woman stood further off in the shadows of the trees. But the most terrifying figure, the man in the coat, was standing by the fountain, staring straight at him. "What do you want?" Artem asked, his voice trembling. Suddenly he heard the reply, "You came to our place. Now you are one of us." In horror, he pointed the camera at himself, and on the screen he saw his own reflection. But it looked strange. His skin was pale. His eyes had turned dark like those of the ghosts he'd seen. The phone slipped from his hands, and the silence of the park closed in around him. Artem realized he was no longer alone.